At issue this Sunday, congressional inaction. Lawmakers returned to Washington this week after leaving for the holidays with major issues unresolved, including funding for Ukraine, Israel, and a plan to deal with a surge of migrants.
Congressman Stephen Lynch is here to talk about what, if anything, he thinks will get done and what happens if Congress continues to kick that can down the road. At Issue starts now.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to the first 2024 edition of At Issue. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. We've got plenty to talk about with Congressman Stephen Lynch, with everything that's going on in Washington, overseas, and of course here in Greater Boston.
But first, let's take a look back at what was at issue this past week.
Breaking news for you this afternoon out of Cambridge. Harvard President Claudine Gay, you see right there, says that she has decided to resign.
President Gay faced calls for her resignation for weeks following her Capitol Hill testimony about on-campus anti-Semitism. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez has been hit with a second indictment.
Huge controversy in the city of Lawrence this morning.
Yeah, so here's why. There's a new city council member sworn onto the council last night, and they're facing a number of voter fraud-related charges here, accused of cheating to win a district AC.
In Boston, the new year means new leadership. 13 city councilors were sworn in today, including 4 newcomers.
One group wants Massachusetts to become the latest state to remove former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making his 4th trip to the region since the Israel-Hamas war began in October. He's heading there largely to ease the fears the conflict could erupt into a broader conflict in the area.
All right, Congress returning to Washington on Tuesday, and it'll have about 10 days before funding for parts of the government run out.
Here we go again, right? New year, same old problem. In the House, the new year means new math. Speaker Mike Johnson's razor-thin majority is getting thinner with the recent departure of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the expulsion of George Santos. The Republican majority now sits at 220 to 213. 2 seats are vacant. And with Republican Bill Johnson of Ohio resigning on January 21st, the GOP loses another seat.
So funding the government is paramount, but President Biden asked months ago for more money to help Israel's war against Hamas and Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression.
Yeah, Republicans said they won't give the president what he wants without major immigration policy changes. Joining us to talk about all of this is Congressman Stephen Lynch, who represents Massachusetts' 8th District, which includes parts of Boston and communities south of the city, including Brockton and Walpole. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Corey.
Appreciate it. You racing for more of the same this year, lurching from funding crisis to funding crisis, or is this maybe the year that things change up on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think there's enough at stake that there's the possibility out there of a sort of an omnibus deal where we have a global agreement on all these issues in one bill. So I know that the Senate's in session right now trying to work that out. Senator Sinema, Senator Murphy, and a number of others are working on that. So hopefully they'll have something close to being finished, and they'll be able to send something to the House. So, but there is the opportunity. There is. I think everyone realizes that, we need to take action on Israel, we need to take action on Ukraine, and we need to do something about the border. That it's become, out of control. We've lost control of the border. So I think that reasonable people can come together on a bill that would address all those issues in a meaningful way. However, we don't know what that bill is going to look like, so stay tuned.
You'll have to forgive me. I think a lot of people hear the word reasonable and hear the word Congress and think those two things are sort of mutually exclusive. But do you think there is, given the slim majority now for Speaker Johnson, do you think there is an appetite to pass in the House whatever comes out of the Senate?
I think between some normal moderate Republicans that are left and Democrats, we could have a coalition on something that I think would address all those problems.
Do you trust those moderate Republicans to buck their party and side with the Democrats and as a lot of Republicans see it, give President Biden a win?
There's a lot at stake. So if they saw reasonable measures to address the border situation, there are many Republicans who do support Ukraine and Israel. So there's a coalescing, I think, that could occur there. But it's important to get the bill right.
So you've been to Ukraine a number of times. Most recently in November, you've met with President Zelensky. You've done your own information gathering. The $60 billion in aid that President Biden requested, is that the amount that they really need, or is that just an inflated number? What's your take on what you've heard and the number that they need to be successful?
Yeah, well, that's not for $60 billion will not get them success overall. but it will allow them to continue to defend their own country and maintain the land area that they currently control. So $6 billion might buy them another couple of years. I know that there are a lot of munitions in that number that they rely upon. So it's largely become trench warfare with artillery doing the predominant damage. So that's what they need to survive right now. And we're not sure what the commitment will be from the EU and from NATO. We fund half of what they've requested. But importantly, one of the components that we provide is the military capacity to resist Putin.
Are conversations now happening about what the long-term solution is here? I mean, the trench warfare cannot continue.
Right. Well, I'm sure that over time, there's attrition occurring here where Russia's lost over 300,000 people. And so how long can they continue to do that? And how long can Zelensky maintain control? He's got a democracy there that he has to deal with. So, you know, in our meeting, he said, look, I have to be very I have to treat Ukrainian life very preciously. He said, whereas Putin can just, you know, recruit in some of the areas, you know, some of the provinces outside of Moscow, and he doesn't feel the political pressure that I do. So they're operating in different systems.
Let's talk about the Israel-Hamas war. The human tragedy continues to climb. As we get further on in this conflict, how concerned are you and your colleagues about this conflict widening in the region?
Very concerned. I've spent a fair amount of time in Israel as well over a long period of time. We saw the effectiveness of Hezbollah fighters in Syria. We also saw back in 2006 with the Lebanese-Israeli war the skill set that many of those fighters have. These are battle-tested fighters, so it would be very difficult for Israel to maintain what they've currently got going on in Gaza, and as well, you know, deploy forces to deal with Hezbollah. So, fortunately, I don't think Hezbollah wants a widening of the war. I don't think Iran wants a widening of the war. So, and Israel, Netanyahu has indicated he's pulling some of his people out of Gaza, which is a good thing, because I think, you know, he's had a fair enough amount of time to deal with Hamas to try to get retribution against the people who actually attacked Israel. Now, you know, the majority of casualties in Gaza are civilians. And so that's why Anthony Blinken is going to Israel again this week. He's probably there now. They're trying to figure out a way to, you know, put those civilians in a place where they're not directly in the line of fire.
We've seen from the Secretary of Defense, from Anthony Blinken as well, and on his visit, asking the Israeli Defense Forces to be more targeted in their attacks into Gaza, yet we really haven't seen that happening. At any point, does this spill over into this funding fight back here at home, where members of the Democratic Party are saying, look, we have got to start conditioning this aid to Israel based on what they're doing in Gaza? Yeah,
I think that's a very real possibility. I do. I know that there were questions about some of the larger munitions, 2,000-pound bombs that Israel was using ostensibly to cave in or to destroy the tunnel system that approaches Israel's border. But even then, you know, many of those munitions have brought death and devastation to the civilian population. So you're exactly right. There are already members in our coalition on the Democratic side that are looking for conditionality with respect to any further aid delivered to Israel.
All right, let's get back to the border. The southern border, a chronic problem that we've had over many administrations. Yeah. Obviously, the Biden administration reopening several of the southern border closings that were closed and are now open. Do you think Biden's doing the right thing here? Is he addressing it? And do you think there are any, national security concerns we should have with the way the border is right now?
The border is porous right now. I think that's my central concern, is that amidst all this, you know, the humanitarian side of things, there's a definite national security element of this that we've got to get a hold of. We've lost the ability to regulate the flow of people across the southern border. Either we need new resources or redouble our efforts. I think that's the thorniest part of this in terms of the negotiations that are going on right now in Washington is how do we change the dynamic there on the border so that we at least are able to regulate the flow of people in and out across the border, and that's not happening right now. Right now, it's an emergency situation, and I think people are scrambling to come up with the resources to deal with this influx.
You think we see any changes to American asylum laws as this fight continues?
I know they're talking about parole and what the conditions are, so that could be. Now, remember, the asylum laws under our Constitution. It guarantees due process and equal protection to all persons, not to citizens, to all persons. That's why when people come over the border and they're applying for asylum, they get a hearing. That's a constitutional right that they enjoy. And so that's not something that Congress can just change. We can't just edit that. So if we were going to change that, the equal protection and due process rights of non-citizens, we would have to do that constitutionally. Okay. And that's a much longer process.
I know you want to ask about the election.
Yeah, so President Biden, of course, you know, is running for re-election. Trump, so many criminal charges against him, so many cases ongoing. What are your concerns about the violence that we have seen in the past? Obviously, we're marking the January 6th anniversary this weekend. How are you feeling about the state of the voters in this country right now?
I worry about our democracy. I worry about our country. I really do. You know, for the longest time, I had this, unabiding faith in the judgment of the American people. But after being in Washington on January 6th and seeing what happened there, see what the response has been, and then seeing the continuing support for the former president, it makes me worry about our democracy itself and whether or not, I don't know. I guess I have a low opinion of public opinion lately, and I'm very troubled with the lack of a shared reality among the American people. You have people who believe one thing, totally non-factual. It's just, it's very troubling, and our country, our greatest strength is our unity, and I think we've lost some of that in recent years.
While we're talking about reality, there are, of course, impeachment inquiries that are going to start against President Biden. There's also the investigation into President Biden's son, Hunter Biden. You're on the House Oversight Committee. What's happening? What are you hearing? Is this just show, or do they really think that there's something here that they can get their teeth into? Well,
based upon what they've done, and I've sat through those hearings, I'm a member of the committee, and so here we are. We have a hearing on Biden's impeachment, and the Republicans bring 4 witnesses, and none of them has any evidence. They're fine people and very thoughtful, and they've got wonderful resumes. But when I asked them, do you have any evidence that you can provide to this committee? They were like, no, we can't.
What happens when that's done and you say to your colleague, there were no facts here, there are no evidence here? What does your Republican colleague say to you back?
Nothing substantive. But look, a lot of them are afraid. They're afraid of the Freedom Caucus. They're afraid of the Trump followers in their districts. So, I mean, there are still some rational and thoughtful, moderate Republicans in the House, but they're all in hiding right now, and they're trying to survive at this point. And so I think many of them just don't want to subject themselves to the attacks that would be visited upon them if they were to tell the truth.
All right, Congressman, don't go anywhere. We still have plenty to talk about, including some local issues like the emergency shelter crisis and UFOs. We'll be right back. Welcome back to At Issue. It seems like every day we're learning more about the crisis at the state's emergency shelter program, which has been fueled in part by the migrant crisis. According to information released by the Healy administration, there are nearly 7,500 families in the shelter program. And of those families, more than 3,500 entered as migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. Congressman Stephen Lynch back with us. We talked about the migrant issue earlier. Your thoughts on how the Healy administration has dealt with this and what you're hearing back in your district?
Well, I think Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll have done an excellent job in trying to look. This was sort of an unexpected, unanticipated surge of people seeking emergency shelter. I think they did a good job. There were some, there was some flying by the seat of our pants, so to speak. I was at the Department of Transportation building downtown a couple of weeks ago, and at that time, there were a number of families housed there. They have since been relocated to more, traditional housing. But the root of the problem is at the border. So the governor is just trying to respond to that problem that is completely unanticipated. Some of the southern governors are choosing Massachusetts and New York and California and other states where they want to embarrass those governors and put them in a difficult position. But I think in terms of the Healy administration, they've done a good job at trying to do as much as they can with the resources that they have. But one of the negotiating points on this deal that's going on in Washington right now is about providing additional funding. And I talked to Lieutenant Governor Driscoll 2 nights ago in Braintree about that fact. So we're trying to get them some more money so that it's not solely on the Massachusetts taxpayer, but federal funding that's been allocated for that purpose.
Another issue in the district that I'm sure you're paying attention to is the one between the city of Boston and the city of Quincy over the Long Island Bridge. Of course, Boston wants to rebuild it to help connect to a new recovery campus on Long Island to help with the city's substance abuse issue, which obviously is not just Mass and Cass, but all around it. Folks would get there by car or vehicles. You'd have to go through Quincy to get there. And the mayor and other officials in Quincy are not so keen on rebuilding it. What's your take on that?
Well, if we're going to spend $160 million on a bridge, I'd rather, and it's ostensibly to care for people with substance abuse and people in recovery, I'd rather spend that $165 million right on the people, not simply as a way to get them back and forth. That's a huge amount of money. We could redo a major hospital for that amount of money and actually, pay to treat people. It'd be going directly to the patients themselves or the residents themselves. I've been around long enough to remember when we had the Long Island facility. And every time someone was in crisis, we had to shuttle them back by ambulance back into Boston where they were treated, then we'd shuttle them back out again. What we were doing was basically warehousing people on an island in Boston Harbor. That's not ideal. That's not ideal. That's sort of pushing your problem, out of sight, out of mind. And I think if you were going to try to build a hospital out there with all of the with all of the necessary improvements that would allow you to treat people out there, that's a much bigger task. And so I don't see the resources for that being put in. I see an argument about a bridge, but it doesn't really get to the root of the problem.
Another issue you've been very involved in is the FAA and representing residents and customers concerning issues at Logan Airport, from that flight path that would go right over someone's house in Milton to the noise calls and complaints, as well as some of the close calls that have happened on the runways. How do you feel the FAA did last year addressing those issues, and what are you concerned about looking forward to in 2024?
Well, we saw some progress. We saw some progress. So they're realigning the flight vectors to go out over the water more than over Milton and Quincy and Dorchester, South Boston. So that is improvement. However, here's the crux of the problem. When Boston Municipal Airport was originally constructed back in the 1920s, they laid out the runways because in a fashion to optimize wind direction. And the planes back then didn't have much thrust power, so they had to use the wind to take off. Now you've got the thousands of pounds of thrust for one engine lets you modify that takeoff route. So what I think we need to do is to reconfigure the runway pattern at Logan Airport to optimize and maximize flying, taking off over the water and landing over the water. That's the end solution. And so that's the conversation I'm having with the FAA right now to try to reconfigure the runways so they don't go over people's homes, but they go over the harbor. That I think is the ultimate solution there.
Let's talk about another issue. You're on the Financial Services Committee. I want to talk about crypto. What is next when it comes to the regulation of cryptocurrency, and do you anticipate that still being a fight, on Congress?
Yeah, well, I think that crypto firms should have to meet all the regulations of our other financial services companies. So, we saw the disaster with FTX, where millions of investors lost all their money with no recourse. We've seen the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, which was, a bank that really catered to that industry. We've seen disastrous consequences of lack of regulation. So I think what the crypto community has to do is come in, register, and abide by the law, such as every other financial institution has to. That's the ultimate solution there. And until they do that, they're going to continue to locate offshore to try to escape the rule of law that we've established here for banks and other financial institutions here in the United States.
All right, let's talk about UFOs, or as we're calling them now, UAPs. Everyone laughs. It's always funny. You are on the House Oversight Committee. Why should people at home care about what you are going to learn in your classified briefing coming up?
Well, I've already had several, and I have to say the one that was done for myself and former Congressman Jim Langevin from Rhode Island was notable. I thought that the Navy officials who came in and described the technology that they identified so these were Navy fighters operating off of, I think, Pensacola, Florida, and they picked up objects on that. And I think a lot of this has been made public. Yep. But they said basically the movement and the tracking that these new navigation systems picked up was something that no country, including the United States on this earth, has. And so they were questioning about the ability of these aircraft to travel at these speeds and turn, change direction, and then basically go off the radar screen so quickly. They had real concerns that they brought to Congress. And so there's tangible evidence of something's going on. I'm not sure what it is, but we certainly have a responsibility to investigate it further.
We've got about 30 more seconds. We've asked you about a lot of things. What's on your priority list for 2024? Well,
a lot of those issues that you've already addressed, Corey, trying to figure the situation out at the border, that has to happen. Ukraine, I've spent enough time that, look, those people are fighting for their very lives. They're dying every single day. The United States has a strong history. This is a land war in Europe. And I can't imagine that FDR or Truman or even George H.W. Bush would have said, well, we'd like to help you, pal, but we don't have it in the budget. And that's sort of what the Republican members are saying to Ukraine right now. If we don't stop Putin there, and these are Ukrainians fighting and dying, that's a much different situation that we might have further on down the road if he attacks a NATO country and there are U.S. men and women in uniform fighting and dying every day to stop that encroachment. So this is the opportunity we have, and I think our money is well spent, and we've got a coalition of people. I think President Biden has done a good job in getting a coalition of European countries to buy into that, and actually, in some cases like with Poland and Romania and Germany, actually, putting troops and equipment in a position to help the Ukrainians succeed.
All right. Congressman Lynch, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy New Year. Good to see you.
All right. We are 1 week and 1 day from the Iowa caucuses, the kickoff of the presidential primary season, and just over 2 weeks from the New Hampshire primary.
And next Sunday, we're going to take a closer look at the state of the race with only a handful of candidates remaining and one of the most unusual, to say the least, campaign seasons in the Granite State. That I can't remember anything like it.
No. And the recent documentary, podcast, and new reporting about the infamous Charles Stewart case introduced a dark chapter in Boston's recent history to a brand new audience. Adrian Walker, one of the journalists who led the reporting, is going to join us. Thank you so much for joining us here at Issue. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Enjoy the day.